All right, here we are for lesson 9.6 in math. So you should have your book open to page 480. I'm going to work through example number 1 to show you how these are done, and I will refer to the information above example 1 as we go through it. So this lesson is on finding the percent of change, which you'll see the questions worded as percent of increase or percent of decrease. If you look in the information below the activity box, it says a percent of change shows how much a quantity has increased or decreased in comparison with the original amount. So in example 1, it says, what is the percent of increase from 8 to 13? Now you might just think, well, why don't you just subtract and get a 5? But that doesn't show a percentage. So let's just work through example 1. Hopefully it'll begin to make sense as we do a few examples. So again, looking up at the information in the middle of 480, you are going to find percent of change by putting the amount of increase or decrease in the numerator. Remember, we're still sort of talking about ratios, but percentages is kind of what we're looking at. And so you see the ratio of the increase or decrease to the original amount. So the easier part to figure out is the original. So looking at example 1, it says what's the percent of increase from 8 to 13. So that means the original amount was 8 because it says from 8. So we started at 8 and we increased to 13. And you will see in the teaching part of 9.6 that it says the original amount goes on the bottom, and that's an 8. Okay, so what goes in the top? The amount of increase or decrease. This is kind of messy. For some reason my pen got thicker writing to it, so sorry about that. I don't know how to fix it. Okay, so what was the amount of increase? So from 8 to 13, what's the amount of change? Well, this is actually easier than it looks. And again, you might remember at the beginning I said, why don't you just subtract? And you'll see that 5 is the difference between 13 and 8. That's actually what you're going to do to fill in the numerator. So the amount of increase from 8 to 13 is 5. All right. Then you have a fraction, 5/8, that you need to translate into a percentage. And I believe we did this in an earlier lesson, but I'll just remind you that all you have to do is divide 5 by 8. Remember, this fraction bar means divide. So go to your calculator. I'm fine with you using it in this chapter, and do 5 divided by 8, and you will get this answer on your calculator. Now that's a decimal answer. You need to change it to a percent. Remember a previous lesson we talked about the Dr. Pepper method. I'm in decimal mode here. So I'm going to move my decimal point 2 spaces to the right. And my final answer is the percent of increase is 62.5%. All right. Let me clear this one off and we'll do another one. Okay, example 2 is finding a percent of decrease. So, question says, what's the percent of decrease from 49? So that's our original amount. to 35. So up here in our numerator, we're going to put the amount of the decrease. We're going to subtract 49 minus 35 and see that we get 14. So we have 14 over 49. Using a calculator, 14 divided by 49 gives me 0.28571429. And then my calculator ran out of space, okay? So you know that percentages usually only go to is a decimal, go to the hundredths place. You have seen the one we just did went to the thousandths place. So I'm going to just write, I'll give you into the 10,000ths place and then tell you that you could round to the thousandths. That would be 0.286. Then to change it to a percent, it would make the answer 28.6%. All right, let's try example 3. Got to clear all of this off so I have some space. All right. Packaging. A taco company puts 24 taco shells in every box. Recently, the company expanded the box and put 25% more shells in each box. How many shells are in every box now? So we have to find the amount of increase. We started with 24 shells in the box. And they're saying that now 25% more are going into the box. So we need to see we need to ask ourselves the question, what is 25% of 24? That's how many more were added. So 25% of 24 is what we're looking for. Okay, let me just remind you that you could use percent equation or percent proportion to solve this. I am going to do it the way I would normally do it. So if you want to use proportion, percent equation, which is sort of what I'm using in this, but I'll just work it out the way I would do it if we were in class. 25%. In order to use the calculator, I need to transfer this to a decimal. And in this situation, of means to multiply. That's how it's used up here in percent equation. So into my calculator, I'm going to type 0.25 times 24, and that gives me 6. You might have known in your head that a quarter of 24 was 6, but either way you have to get to 6. So 6 tacos are what the packaging was increased by, okay? So the question says, how many shells are in every box now? Well, there was already 24 shells in the box. They got an increase of 6, and that gave them 30 shells in the box. All right. You might be asking yourself, why are we doing this in 9.6 when we didn't use our percent of change equation? But this is the question they gave you. In this situation, I would not use the percent of change equation mentioned on page 480. So I just worked it out the way that I would do it, which actually is the way the textbook does it in example 3. So I'm just saying that because you're not going to use that amount of change over original in every single situation. Read the question. See what they're asking you to solve for. Okay, let me clear this off and we will go into guided practice. All right, guided practice numbers 1, 2, and 3 are set up so that you will solve them pretty much the same way. But I'm going to do all 3 of them with you because this lesson is a little bit confusing, I think. So I'm going to write my ratio, my fraction that's set up for me on page 480 at the top, so I'll remember how to do this. Amount of change that can be increase or decrease over original. That's the important thing to remember. The original goes on the bottom. So, number 1, guided practice. Again, if you want to pause the video, work these 3 out, and then come back and I'll give you the answer as we're doing it. All right, number 1. It tells us that the original is 16 and the new is 28. If the new is 28 and the original was 16, that means that we had an increase, right? Because we went from 16 to 28. I need to subtract to see what the increase was. It was 12. Now I'm going to go back to my calculator and I'm going to do 12 divided by 16 and I'm going to get 0.75, which I need to convert to a percentage. That is 75%. And you will see this in the back when you check your homework problems. You do need to say whether it was an increase or a decrease. All right, let's do number 2. Original, 35. The new amount is 91. So again, we have an increase. I need to find out how much of an increase, so I'm going to subtract. And that's going to give me 56. Okay, then into my calculator, I'm going to do 56 divided by 35 and get 1.6. And I'm going to put a 0 here because you will see to transfer this decimal to a percent, I actually have to go over here on the other side of the 0. So it's 160% increase. Okay, let me say something about this 160%. This is over 100%, right? And if you look up here, you will see that if the original was 35, but we increased by 56, we increased by more than 100%, by more than the 35. So even if we only had 36 up here, we would have an increase of over 100%, right? Because to increase 35 by 100% would give us 35 again, okay? So I'm just trying to explain why you should, if the increase, the change amount in the numerator is higher than the original amount, your answer should reflect that in being over 100%. Hopefully this will come up again and I can go over it. I'm sure that was a little bit confusing. Okay, last one in this section of percent of change, number 3. It tells us that the original amount was 60 and the new was 12. So that's a decrease. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to get 48 as my amount of change. Using my calculator, I'm going to do 48 divided by 60. That gives me 0.8. I have to transfer this to a percent. So it was an 80% decrease because my new number was less than my original. All right, I'm going to stop the video here because I'm almost out of time. I will post a second video that starts with number 4 and does some work out of the lesson.